Is Spider-Man 3 as good as the first two? No, definitely not. Is it the worst superhero movie in the world, though? Again, definitely not. Spider-Man 3 is certainly disappointing, for lack of a better word, even if it's not the worst movie in the world by any means. However, this can be partly blamed on Avi Arad, who forced Sam Raimi to use Venom, a character that he didn't like in the final movie. But that begs the question, what would Sam Raimi have done with absolutely no studio interference? What if Sam Raimi's original version of Spider-Man 3 was made? Months before the release of Spider-Man 2, Columbia Pictures would announce that a third film was already in active development and gave an estimated release date of summer 2007, though this was later moved up to May of 2007. Alvin Sargent, who worked on the last movie, would return as screenwriter, with Sam Raimi's brother, Ivan Raimi, writing the screenplay. Sam Raimi was known to very much enjoy working with Cliff Robertson, who played Uncle Ben in Spider-Man 1. He enjoyed working with him so much that he looked for reasons to bring him back in the sequels. Thus, he came up with the idea of centering the third film around Uncle Ben's death. Raimi expressed his desire to use the Sandman as the one who truly killed Uncle Ben. He wanted him as the secondary villain due to finding him to be quote-unquote visually interesting. His plan for the third film was to make it a movie about forgiveness, Peter forgiving the Sandman, and Harry forgiving Peter. This version would have introduced us to Eddie Brock, a rival photographer for Peter at the Daily Bugle, though he was not supposed to become Venom until a future installment. Also, the Vulture was expected to appear as an accomplice of the Sandman, and would have been played by the always amazing Ben Kingsley. Now, in the third act, Harry would have to forgive and team up with Peter to go to battle with both of these villains. However, the script became so dense with new characters that Alvin Sargent considered splitting it up into two movies, but he later canceled the idea since he couldn't find a good midway point. However, Avi Arad in the end shot down the Vulture's inclusion. He believed that Venom would be a much more suitable villain for the story, and that Sam Raimi only liked to use villains that he personally liked, even if nobody else was actually interested in seeing them. Raimi, however, wasn't really a big fan of the Venom character due to believing that he had a lack of humanity. He would also be forced to include a romantic rival for Mary Jane with Gwen Stacy. This was due to Kirsten Dunst reportedly not wanting to return for Spider-Man 4 initially, and thus Gwen Stacy would be included just in case Spider-Man 4 couldn't have Mary Jane. Now, in the end, Spider-Man 3 would be released in May of 2007 and became the highest grossing superhero movie ever at the time, but garnered very mixed reviews from critics. Alright, so I've got a hot take on this version of Spider-Man 3. I don't actually think it would be that much better than the one we got, honestly. Because, okay, I admit the Vulture probably would have been done better than Venom. I will grant you that. But, you would also have to introduce the Vulture apart from Spider-Man, because say what you will about Venom, at least he was introduced in a way that actually connected to Peter's story, because it attached itself to Peter, so it was him experiencing it. We were basically introduced to Venom through the main character, while the Vulture, we'd have to take away from Peter's scenes to focus on him. Either that, or lump him in with the Sandman, which would just kind of ruin the Sandman's story and the Vulture's story, because then neither of them would get as much much focus. And then there's the fact that the Sandman was still going to have killed Uncle Ben in this version, which is honestly one of my biggest problems with the actual Spider-Man 3. I really didn't like it. I thought it overcomplicated Uncle Ben's death, and it just kind of ruined it for me. Because as cruel as it is to say, I think it works better when Peter partly blames himself. But then it's like, no, now he can blame the Sandman. But then it turns out the Sandman did it on accident, so now it's nobody's fault. It just retroactively makes Uncle Ben's death less important to the story. You know what I mean? It ruins it for me. And the fact that Sam Raimi was going to do that anyway, I don't think it would really be that much better if Venom wasn't in it, because Venom had nothing to do with that. So, a lot of people ignore that. A lot of people just automatically say, if Sam Raimi had his way, Spider-Man 3 would have been better. And it probably would have been slightly better, but I still think it would have been the worst movie of the trilogy. I still think it would have disappointed people, because as I said, they would have had to lump the Vulture and Sandman together, origin story-wise, or risk, taking away from Peter's story. The movie was already really long as it is for a Spider-Man movie. 2.5 hours, I think, was kind of pushing it. Well, it wasn't exactly 2.5 hours. You get what I mean? It was longer than the first two by a noticeable amount, at least for me. And, Sam Raimi talks about how he wanted to focus on Harry Osborn. But, how can he say that when he's also trying to focus on, the Vulture and the Sandman? You know what I mean? It's confusing. Now, if I were in Sam Raimi's place, I would have either done Spider-Man 3 with just Harry Osborn, or I would have done Spider-Man 3 with Harry Osborn and Venom, and then just made Harry Osborn Venom. Then you can have sort of two villains, but you're still making it about Peter versus Harry, because Spider-Man 3 should have been Spider-Man's Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion. When Peter and Harry fight each other, I wanted it to feel like Anakin versus Obi-Wan. You know what I mean? I wanted all the choir and fanfare. I wanted that epic Danny Elfman / Christopher Young theme to be playing as they fought over the streets of New York, and we got that. But it happened early in the movie, and then, he had that stupid amnesia subplot, which I'm pretty sure this one would have had too. And, then they introduced Venom that has nothing to do with either of them, and they introduced the Sandman, which, as I said, retroactively kind of just ruins Uncle Ben's story, which, no offense, isn't really that relevant, I think, to Spider-Man 3. So I don't think it would have been much better, honestly. I mean, granted, Vulture probably would have been better handled than Venom, and Gwen Stacy probably wouldn't have been in this version, which, in my opinion, she shouldn't have been in Spider-Man 3. No disrespect to Bryce Dallas Howard, who I think is actually kind of underrated in the role, even though she didn't really have a lot to do. I've always really appreciated the fact that she goes out of her way to apologize to Mary Jane at the nightclub. I've always loved that, because it shows that she knows that Peter manipulated her, and she is in no way willing to play along with it. And I've always absolutely loved that. And, I admit, I would have loved to see more of her character explored, but also at the same time, no, because Mary Jane was there, and we needed to keep the focus on that, but they kept taking it away for the, love triangle, or love square, I guess, if you include Harry. And then you add in all these villains, and it's a complicated mess. And I think Sam Raimi's version would have been a little better, just because, Gwen Stacy wouldn't have been in there, taking everything away from it. But yeah, this movie still sounds really overcrowded to me. It still makes the mistake of making the Sandman responsible for Uncle Ben's death. And, I don't think it sounds that much better, honestly. Even if it got a 70 on Rotten Tomatoes, it would still be the weakest Spider-Man movie of the trilogy. And granted, maybe if they let him do his version, it would have been, as I said, better. And then maybe he wouldn't have left. Maybe they would have learned to just, let him do his thing, because when they let him do his thing, it's at least decent. So then they would just let him do his own thing, and then maybe we would have gotten Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6. Who knows? That's just what I'm thinking. But ultimately, I kind of understand why Sony wanted to save the Vulture for Spider-Man 4, because, I don't think that they handled it right, but I understand why they didn't want the Vulture, because I do think that either either Harry Osborn or the Sandman should have been the only villain in this movie, with a possibility of throwing in Venom if it was just Harry Osborn. You know, that's what I would have done. I don't think that the Vulture needed to be in this one, and if I'm being honest, I don't think the Sandman should have been in it either. No disrespect to Thomas Hayden Church, who did a great job, but he kind of took away from the story a little bit. Like, I know the story they were trying to tell was good, and it was good, but like, it was also unnecessary in my opinion, and it took away from the stuff with Peter and MJ and Peter and Harry, which is I think where Spider-Man 3 should have kept its focus. And Sam Raimi has admitted that he agrees with that, so I don't think that's too much of a hot take. But let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with me. Do you think that this version would have been better than the Spider-Man 3 that we got in real life, or do you think it would have been worse? Let me know about it in the comments down below. Also, let me know your opinions on the actual Spider-Man 3 in general, because as I said, I don't hate the actual Spider-Man 3. I just find it disappointing. You know, I've never fully hated it. I just find it to be a bit disappointing. But let me know in the comments if you hate it more than I do or love it more than I do. I'd love to hear about it. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share with all of your friends on all your various social media platforms. And speaking of social media, don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Rinzler_Productions, and I'll see all of you tomorrow in the next video.